Welcome to our meeting of the Higher Purpose Forum. Today, we're going to discuss a very important understanding of human history called divine providence. And we have an expert as our main speaker who's written a book and several other books associated with the concept of history proceeding in a linear fashion in a providential direction. And the question we're asking tonight is, what is the role of Islam in providential history, in divine providence? And if we can understand the role of Islam, then how do we understand the developments in Gaza, which are tragic, but actually historically very significant? Our primary speaker today is Thomas Cromwell. Thomas was a missionary in the Middle East since 1975, and when he was there, he founded the he founded the Middle East Times newspaper, and he was the founder and editor of that for 19 years. It was a very significant publication. And since that time, he's continued to be involved with issues in the Middle East and issues relating to his area of expertise, which is divine providence. And in fact, he's written this book, Triumph of Good, which is a book that a lot of people I know have read and have highly recommended. And he has a publishing company, East West Publishing. They have about 6 books on their website that he has either written or edited. And here's 2 more: Why Ukraine Must Win, and a book he edited called Full Circle, which is actually on science. So we're very happy to hear Tom's presentation today. He's involved with promoting these ideas through an organization called New American Initiative, the Abrahamic Alliance. And our respondent is a Sudanese, a Muslim-educated religious leader from Sudan, Abdelmoumin Ahmed, who studied Islam and has done also quite a bit of publishing in areas of Islam and world peace. He's the president of I think that's the correct term, the president of the Family Federation in Sudan, and also the Secretary General of Universal Peace Federation, Sudan. Some of you might have expected Taj Ahmed to speak today, but I will share with you that since he accepted the invitation to speak here, in the meantime, he's been appointed to be the Secretary General or the Director, I'm not quite sure what his title is, of the Universal Peace Federation International, which is a huge position. So let the record show that before he took on that role, he had accepted to speak in this forum, which is a great, great honor for us. But we're very happy in his place to have Abdelmoumin Ahmed from Sudan. He's now in Japan. And the reason he's in Japan is because his country is involved, as you probably know, in a very severe civil war. And it gets very little coverage because of what's going on in Gaza and Ukraine, but it is right now as I understand, the leading humanitarian crisis in the world. And it's the malnutrition and deprivation of the people of Sudan is really severe. It's just a shame it doesn't get more notoriety in the media. So I'm going to invite Mr. Cromwell to speak for 30 minutes. We'll have a little discussion after that, and then our respondent will speak for 10 minutes. And then about 8:30, we will open up the floor for moderated discussion. And so I welcome you to prepare your questions. If you'd like to post a question, rather than speaking in the discussion, if you'd rather post a comment or a question in the chat, please feel free to do that. We may or may not get to everything in the chat. So I think that covers our introductions. Now I'd like to begin the program by inviting Thomas Cromwell to take the floor.
Thank you. Let me get the... Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. This is actually such a major topic, an important topic with so many ramifications. It was very hard to try and make a presentation that I think does it justice. So I'm going to move pretty quickly through my slides, hoping that at least they raise issues or perspectives that are worth your consideration as we go along. So in this presentation, I want to look at the root causes of the Gaza war and the need for a godly solution for a Cain-dominated world. Abraham's family is the vanguard of the Providence, Mohammedan Islam in the divine providence, including a brief history of Islam, which I think should be helpful, and solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is what we're dealing with now. So we need to understand the root causes of the conflict if we are to come up with a meaningful and successful solution. I got to get rid of these things on my screen. Oh, sorry, I lost it. Yeah. I don't know why I can't get it.
Is there a menu that's blocking your view of your presentation?
Yeah, it could be. I don't know. I was trying to clear my screen of obstacles.
Yeah.
Um,
I think you can point the cursor at it, click on it, and then move it.
yeah, let me see if I can. Okay, here. Okay. Sorry about that. So the Gaza war reveals the depth of Muslim-Jewish hatred. It was obviously initiated October 7th, 2023, with a barbaric Hamas attack on Israel. Some 1,200 Israelis were killed, often with sort of beyond imagination cruelty. Many were tortured and brutalized. Many women were raped. 251 hostages were taken to Gaza. Many of them have died, but there's still 59 there, either dead or alive. The result, of course, was that Israel has reacted with huge force because it's determined now to remove Hamas as a threat completely. The Israelis realize they cannot live at peace if there's a Hamas next to them determined to destroy them. So we've seen 19 months of war in which Gaza has been largely destroyed. Hamas has used hostages as bargaining chips and civilians as shields. Hamas claims something like 50,000 Palestinians have killed, although no one really knows the substance of those numbers. How many were combatants? How many were innocent civilians? Israel's lost some 1,700 people in this conflict. So what is the root of this anti-Jewish and anti-Western hatred? I'd like to refer to an article by Bernard Lewis, a leading authority on the Middle East and Islam. And he wrote a great article in 1990 in the Atlantic magazine called The Roots of Muslim Rage, with which I agree a lot. So he says, in part, the Muslim mood is surely due to a feeling of humiliation, a growing awareness among the heirs of an old, proud, and long dominant civilization of having been overtaken, overborne, and overwhelmed by those whom they regard as their inferiors. He goes on, Islamic fundamentalism has given an aim and a form to the otherwise aimless and formless resentment and anger of the Muslim masses. That's my underlining. At the forces that have devalued their traditional values and loyalties, and in the final analysis robbed them of their beliefs, their aspirations, their dignity, and an increasing extent, even their livelihood. This makes sense if you realize that Muslims see the Quran as the most recent, comprehensive, up-to-date revelation from God, and therefore their belief in it and following of it should put them in a superior position. However, they've had to suffer often in a secondary position by the nature of human conflict and human domination. So what is the cause and nature of human resentment? This is really a key point. It's really the result of failing to share God's viewpoint. So it's the driver of disobedience and alienation from God. It's used to justify sin, irresponsible attitudes and behaviors. It can easily overwhelm faith, morality, and reason. It's such a powerful force. So Lucifer's resentment towards God and Adam led to his rebellion. It was his resentment. Cain's resentment toward God and Abel led to his murder of Abel. So when Cain murdered Abel, this completed the original alienation from God of the first family. The scriptures of both the Bible and the Quran have very similar accounts of the Cain-Abel story. So in the Bible, it says, the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry and why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is couching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. In other words, Cain has the option, he has the responsibility to overcome his resentment and his anger. But Cain said to Abel, his brother, let us go to the field. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. The Quran does not have Cain and Abel by name, but it speaks about the two sons of Adam and Eve and clearly referring to them. And it says, and recite thou to them the story of the two sons of Adam truthfully, when they offered a sacrifice and it was accepted of one of them and not accepted of the other. I will surely slay thee, said one. God accepts only of the God-fearing, said the other. So resentment lies at the heart of Cain-type ideas and actions. So it's the sentiment most exploited by Satan to create conflicts. And we know from history that this is the agenda of Satan, to constantly create conflicts. So resentment motivates evil behavior in history and in the world today. It unites people and groups around evil objectives. They share common resentments. It motivates violent extremism of all types. And so Satan exploits resentment in believers and non-believers alike. You find it across all types of human aspirations, human sentiments. In the religious sphere, for example, in talking about Islam, it motivates jihadism and violent Islamist extremism. In the secular atheistic world, it motivates Marxists and neo-Marxists or communists. Hence the Cain-type alliance between jihadists and Marxists. This originated in the Middle East, where one had initially opposition to Israel among the Palestinians, led by secular, largely Marxist groups like the PFLP, the DFLP, the PLO, Abu Nidal, and so on. It was later in the 80s that the religious element came in through Hamas. But now it's truly global. We have communists in Europe, in the US, and around the world supporting the Hamas agenda. So they combine it with their theory of Marxist revolution and the intifada, or the so-called uprising of the Palestinians in Israel, is equated with a revolution. So why have they made common cause? This is a peculiar and surprising thing to many people. Well, Marxism and neo-Marxism also embody Cain-type resentment. Roger Scruton, one of the leading conservative philosophers in the UK, in a book called Fools, Frauds, and Firebrands, points this out. He says, behind the impassioned rhetoric of the Communist Manifesto, behind the pseudoscience of Marx's labor theory of value, and behind the class analysis of human history, lies a single emotional source: resentment of those who control things. So this applies both to Marxist and neo-Marxist ideologies. So we need a godly solution for a Cain-dominated world. So goodness is spread through love, service, collaboration, the opposite things that one finds in the Cain realm. In a very simple analysis, there are four remedies for a Cain-dominated world of conflicts. We need to end our alienation and return to oneness with God. We need to become mature and responsible men and women. We need to overcome the resentments and seek God's perspective. And finally, we need to understand and follow the divine providence. And this is the central thesis of my presentation. So what is the divine providence? It's essentially the realization of God's unchanging good purpose for the creation over time. And I like to think of it in the terms of an invisible hand of God guiding the world and our lives. We all experience, those of us who are attuned to a spiritual reality, experience the guidance of God, but it's also operating in the world constantly. Very importantly, it precedes and therefore transcends all differences. So it's upstream from religion, from ideology, from culture, from politics. Therefore, to find a solution to the world's problems, we need to find a providential perspective. It's the basis for overcoming all divisions. We need a providential view of our own life and faith. This view reveals our portion of responsibility, which is what we have to do to solve the problems, but it should also guide a collective decision making. So, a primary responsibility of all religions is to teach the divine providence because it's the transcendent basis for unifying the world's peoples, religions, races, and so on. Why is it so difficult for us to do this? Probably many of you know this quotation from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. The line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart and through all human hearts. This is, of course, the struggle between Cain and Abel within each of us, and it's our Cain-like nature that makes it difficult for us to unite with the divine providence. So how then does it advance? It advances through the triumph of good over evil. Cain and Abel represent relative evil and good, respectively. They're not absolutes. Cain, as the oldest son, is most burdened by fallen nature, which originates in Lucifer. So he's the archetype of evil. He's resentful, jealous, irresponsible, and in the end, he's willing to kill Abel to get his way. Abel, by contrast, is blessed with a better, more Adamic parental nature, thinking of Adam before the fall. So he becomes the archetype of good. He's faithful, forgiving, responsible, and he will risk all to save Cain. I'm not saying that all of these characteristics are revealed in the scriptures. They're certainly not, but they're revealed over time through history. So how does the Cain-Abel relationship or paradigm work? The world is full of Cains and Abels, ideas, people, groups, nations, blocks of nations. Abel must prevail over Cain for good to triumph. If Cain prevails, both sides lose, and a new Abel must be chosen, as happened in the historical example of Seth. But also Cain is not a fixed or absolute position vis-a-vis Abel, and vice versa. We have the great example of St. Paul, who was probably the leading persecutor of the Christians, but after his vision on the road to Damascus, went through a total transformation and turned 180 degrees and became probably the most important leading Christian. The ultimate goal then is for Cain also to become good. Then Cain and Abel together can unite as brothers under God and work together to build the kingdom of heaven. This is the ideal. So what action should Cain and Abel take? Abel must love and serve Cain to win over him through love. Cain ultimately has to surrender to Abel and follow him. Both must reject their inner Cain and follow their inner Abel to achieve this, but they are transformed through that reconciliation, and then both can be blessed by God. So the Cain-Abel struggle has shaped human history. In fact, this is the core of human history. Very briefly, all of you are familiar, I think, with this sort of summary of the providence. Seth became the ancestor of Noah. Ham failed, so Shem became the ancestor of Abraham. Abraham's first two sons were from Hagar, the servant of Sarah, and from Sarah, Ishmael and Isaac. Abraham's family is very important, and I like to think of it as the vanguard of the providence because it's the beginning point when the providence is actually translated from individual relationships, familial relationships, to the actual construction of the beginning of a heavenly family on earth. But even from an external or historical point of view, Abraham's enormously important and impactful in the world. His family demonstrated how the providence advances from the individual and family to the nation. His family is the source of the three great monotheistic religions, which now account for something like 4.5 billion of the 8 billion people in the world. Christians 2.6, Muslims 1.9, and the Jews probably something like 16 million. But these religions are the foundation for our monotheistic civilizations, for human rights and justice, for liberty and democracy, for science and technology. If you look at the Renaissance, didn't emerge as a rejection of religion. It emerged originally through people like Petrarch and Erasmus and Copernicus as an extension of their faith. So a slightly different way to look at them is these religions is from the providential point of view. Abraham through Hagar, Ishmael, his 12 sons, and their tribes, and then the Arabs through Muhammad and Islam. Abraham and Sarah through Isaac and Jacob, his 12 sons, and the tribes to Judaism. Israel, and out of Israel came Jesus, his 12 disciples formed the foundation for Christianity. But there's always a need for vanguard figures in the providence to advance it. So these 4.5 believers are a force that can change the world and defeat Cain-type forces that continue to dominate it. However, they need to be shown how to transcend their limitations. They need to be shown how to be able-like, so they can work together for the fulfillment of the divine providence. It's important to note that all the Abrahamic religions share a providential mission. They have several core beliefs that are the same. Our universe is the work of a purposeful creator. Human beings are the ultimate purpose for the creation. They are the most complete embodiment of God's image. They alone have a spiritual nature and capacity for love. They are responsible to love God, to love other people, and to love nature, which we call the three blessings. The nuclear family is the best school for learning true love. And the ultimate human destiny is the kingdom of heaven. So why are Abraham's descendants so divided? One can look at the conflict between Cain and Abel in a sense as a failure of Adam and Eve, who had been corrupted by the fall and therefore were incapable of raising their sons to love one another and to create a harmonious family. So this is what has to be restored. However, in the story of Abraham's family, this proved a problem. As we know, Sarah gave her servant Hagar because Abraham was unable to have children. Sarah was barren initially. And when Hagar became pregnant, she became arrogant, and Sarah insisted that she be removed from the household, sent away. But she was visited by an Abel and told to go back and submit to Sarah, which she did. But later, when Sarah had a child of her own, Isaac, about 13 or 14 years later, she saw them playing together and she was angry. So here it says in Genesis, but Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, playing with the son Isaac. So she said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman and the son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. Nevertheless, Abraham loved both Ishmael and Isaac, and God comforted him. And the thing that was very pleasing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, be not displeased because of the lad and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. For through Isaac shall your descendants be named, and I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring. The same promise of blessing had been given by an angel to Hagar when she first returned to the home. So in a kind of summary, a very brief summary of Abraham's role in the divine providence, we have two lines of descendants. The first is from Hagar through Ishmael, who had 12 sons, who became the 12 tribes of the Ishmaelites, out of whom came the Arabs, and eventually Mohammedan Islam. Through Sarah came Isaac and then Esau and Jacob. Of course, Jacob had 12 sons, who became the 12 tribes of Israel. And eventually Jesus appeared as a messianic figure, and the Israelites were divided. The Israeli establishment in general rejected Jesus as the Messiah, and they continued with their faith, and that's the root of Judaism, whereas those who accepted Jesus established Christianity. Again, all of Abraham's descendants are providential. And Islam, if you read the Quran, it's not that easy to understand, but it does discuss all the providential figures, nearly all, I think, that are in the Bible, in the biblical lineage. And this explains the theology behind that. We believe in God and that which has been sent down to us and sent down on Abraham and Ishmael, Isaac and Jacob and the tribes, and in that which was given to Moses and Jesus and the prophets of their Lord. We make no division between any of them, and to him we surrender. So our role to inherit the vanguard of the divine providence is to unite Abel's across all faiths initially, but across all divisions. All Abrahamic faiths are part of the same providence. They have been divided by enemies of the providence. All Abel-type people of faith and goodwill belong here. So this is not limited to Abraham's family. Obviously, it's for all Abel-type people across the world. Through faith and love, we can overcome our differences and defeat the forces of evil, materialism, hatred, bigotry, violence. We are all responsible for supporting the providence. Again, this is our personal responsibility. But Abel-type religious and cultural leaders have a special duty to lead in this respect. So to summarize this, we can see history as a sort of contest between the divine providence, God's purpose working itself out on the one hand, on the other hand, the opposition to that, what I call the satanic anti-providence. As people of faith, one stands between Cain and Abel, and we have to choose. The choices we make determine the direction of history. If we choose Cain, we create evil. If we choose Abel, we create good. Cain produces conflict, Abel harmony. Cain war and terrorism, Abel love and peace. Cain suffering, Abel happiness. And ultimately, Cain hell on earth and in the spirit world, and heaven on earth and in the spirit world. So it's our personal responsibility to make the right choices so we can fulfill the divine providence. Briefly, I want to give a summary of Mohammedan Islam in the divine providence. Some basic information. I don't have much time here, but Muhammad was born about 570 AD. In 610, 40 years later, he began to receive revelations from Gabriel, and that began a period of evangelism in Mecca, which was a polytheistic environment. In 622, at the invitation of Yathrib, a nearby city, they moved there, and Muhammad became the leader of that town. This movement is called the Hijra, or the migration, and this provides the first date of the Muslim calendar, which is solar. Yathrib was then renamed Medina, which simply means the city in Arabic. The Muslim community became the rulers of Medina, and Muslim armies engaged in three major battles with Mecca. In 630, they took control of Mecca, which contained the Kaaba, which became the center, ultimately, of the religion. In 632, Muhammad died. Despite having 11 wives, he had no male heirs that survived. From 632 to 661, then, we have what's called the Orthodox Caliphate, or the Rashidun Caliphate. Caliphate means viceroyship, something like that. So the four Orthodox caliphs are Abu Bakr, Omar, Uthman, and Ali. Muslim armies then conquered Arabia and expanded outwards. This began while Muhammad was still alive. In 661, Muawiyah defeated Ali and became the fifth caliph, and the caliphate was moved to Damascus. Pardon? So the Umayyad Caliphate was in Damascus from 661 to 750. In 750, the Abbasids defeated the Umayyads, and the Caliphate was moved to Baghdad. This was destroyed by Hugelu later on. Some basic elements of the scripture. Uthman compiled the Quran, which is basically 114 chapters of what they call surahs, the longest at the beginning, the shortest at the end. There are two major sections, the Mecca section, the Medina. Medina is more involved in social life, structure, law, inheritance law, and so on. The content is not chronological. It doesn't follow the biblical chronology, sorry. So there's no core narrative. The many biblical figures appear. Jesus is mentioned the most. People of the book generally are recognized as fellow believers, but Jews and Christians are accused of making changes to scriptures. Islam shares the legalism of Judaism. In that sense, it's closer to Judaism than Christianity, I would say. The basic faith you're probably all familiar with is this, the five pillars of Islam. Shahada, the confession of faith, Salah, 5 daily prayers, Psalm, the fasting and Ramadan, Zakat, tithing, Hajj, a pilgrimage once in your life. You have to follow the Quran and the Hadith. The Hadith is the traditions of the Prophet. In practice, Islam has two major divisions, the Sunni, which means to follow the words and deeds of the Prophet, and this is divided into four major schools of jurisprudence, Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki, and Hanbali. About 85 to 90% of Muslims are Sunni, with Saudi Arabia, and Al-Azhar major centers. The Shia revere Ali and his sons, Hassan and Hussein, and have a total of 12 imams. They believe a Mahdi will precede the return of Christ, but they have more of that orientation than do Sunnis. They represent about 200 million members across the world. Both sides have slightly different beliefs and consider the others illegitimate. This is sort of a summary, and I know I have to speed up here, but so you have the four Orthodox caliphates, then you have the Umayyads, the Abbasids, the Mamluks, and then the Ottomans in 1517 conquer Cairo, and the caliphate moves to Istanbul. This was ended by Ataturk after about 400 years in 1924. On the Shia side, you have 12 imams. The last one, Muhammad al-Mahdi, is considered to have sort of disappeared and is supposed to return as the Mahdi. So you have, again, 1.9 billion Muslims. You have 57 countries that are members of the Islamic organization. Some major virtues of Islam: it ended polytheism, it's unequivocally monotheistic, it teaches our actions have consequences, its worship is largely universal and free of denominationalism. It's a religion of daily and annual spiritual discipline. It facilitated the transfer of Greek knowledge to the West in what we call the Middle Ages and was quite instrumental in the Renaissance. It has fostered education and acceptance of science and technology. The requirement to tithe has fostered charitable work. Some of the problems with the teachings from a principle point of view: it fails to recognize the parental nature of the Creator. It fails to recognize the original sin and therefore the need for salvation. It lacks a chronology which gives you a narrative of the providential history. And it lacks an understanding of its own providential role, in other words, how it fits within the larger providence. It lacks a coherent explanation of the spirit world and eternity. And unfortunately, it's dominated today by fundamentalists, the Salafists, the Wahhabis, for example. Its engagement with Judaism and Christianity, I would say, is largely superficial on the level of interfaith. It is too judgmental. Its fatwas condemn apostates to death. Some of the helpful elements. There's only one Almighty God. God created everything in pairs, is clear about that. Every person has his own direct relationship with God. Every person has their own responsibility before God. Jesus, of course, was not a man in Islam. Not God, sorry, he was a man. Mary was not the mother of the man Jesus. Mary is the mother of the man Jesus, not of God. Revelation of God did not end with the death of Jesus. This is another aspect. The Ummah, that's all believers, includes people of all races, classes. I want to point to one able type movement within Islam that probably many of you know of, which is Sufism. And there's no time to discuss it in depth, but basically Sufi see Islam, the five pillars, as just the foundation for a more internal faith. Iman is faith in angels, in the scriptures, and so on. And the final stage of spiritual growth is to believe in Allah, knowing that He sees you even though you don't see Him. It's like an internal life of faith. So Sufism is divided into movements and it's called the Tasawwuf movement altogether. It's a movement of enlightenment and purification. It prioritizes self-reflection and service rather than fundamentalism. And this is the key point I'm underlining here. This is a very able type attitude. It's predominantly Sunni, but also found in Shia Islam. For example, in Egypt, there's some 15 million Sufis. In Sudan, probably 33 million Sufis. Suf means wool. So a Sufi is an ascetic. He wears wool. He's self-disciplined. He's mystical. And Sufism is organized into what they call tariqas, which is the word for paths in Arabic. They're usually centered on one sheikh, on one leader. Some of you may know these figures. For example, the Naqshbandi tariqa is a very large one. The Grand Mufti of Syria, Ahmed Kuftaro, is the leader of the Naqshbandis in Syria. Shazliya, Mohsen Laban, another person we know from Egypt. Samanea is a Sudanese branch. Qadriya, Burhaniyya. There's many of these in the world. Probably many of you are familiar with this image of the Mevlevi whirling dervishes in Konya in Turkey. This is an order established by Rumi. You see here the sheikh. He's controlling what they're doing. The whole point of this exercise is to enter into a state of oneness in God. In other words, to transcend the earth. These are pictures I took from Omdurman across the river in Khartoum, from Khartoum. This is a Samanea Sheikh, Raila Bala. And this is, to give you an idea, this is Friday afternoon in burning Sudanese heat. After their regular prayers, they do this chanting, which is called the zikr. Zikr means memory. So to contact God, so they chant Allah, Allah, like that, under the control of the Sheikh. This is Ahmed Koftaru with Reverend and Mrs. Moon. Some of the problematic features or elements of Islam, which is really what's behind the conflict in Gaza, are its history of expansion through military conquest. Some of you know the Dar al-Islam, Dar al-Harb. This is a problematic theory. It has a history of persecuting minorities under its authority, of failing to curb extremism and terrorism. The Muslim Brotherhood, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Islamic Jihad. It tends to favor the community over the individual in a rather negative way, I would say. For example, in communism, you have the same problem. It has often been used for harmful political agendas. Its culture has often stifled learning and independent thinking, and it harbors deep resentment and anger towards Judeo-Christianity, as we mentioned. Nevertheless, it fulfills God's promise to Abraham and Hagar. So Ishmael's lineage has been blessed. It is a providential fruit of his lineage. Israel, if Israel had accepted Jesus, it would likely have embraced the Ishmaelites as the nearest relatives of the descendants of Isaac. Christianity inherited this mission to end Ishmael's resentment. And Christians and Muslims, however, have usually fought instead of loving each other's. The Crusades, colonialism deepened their mutual animosity and resentment. So Muslims share the Abrahamic mission with Jews and Christians. We should understand we're part of the same mission. So we must overcome the mutual resentments. I'm nearly ended. So we need an able-type collaboration within the divine providence. There will never be peace with Hamas in control of Gaza or other terrorist organization, whether communist or radical extremist jihadist. Able-type Muslims must reject Hamas, Islamic Jihad et al. Able-type Israelis must unite with able-type Palestinians. Able-type Jews, Christians, and Muslims must work together. Israel's secularism alone lacks the vision and heart needed for peace. It must really come from a spiritual root to be successful. All sides must reject the temptations to extremism and terror. The intermediator that should come into the picture, of course, is the UN. That's part of his mission, but it's failed hopelessly in Israel. UNRWA is corrupt and controlled by Hamas. As able, the United States should provide providential parental leadership. Finally, to take a few words about this from Reverend Moon. The fighting and conflict cannot end in an era of democracy or brothers, but will only come to an end in the era of parent-centered thought. If America continues to serve its own interests, it will not be able to turn the world around. So America has to be the parent. It has to embody the spirit of Christianity and the mission of a new Israel. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That was like the history of monotheism, but it was full of insight and expertise. I think at times when the providential condition in the world was clear, let's say after an event like World War II, the notion of divine providence, I think, was pretty well accepted and well understood, and people had a feel for it. I think that was even the case in the 70s and 80s. But I notice now, Thomas, that if you talk about divine providence, a lot of people being very cynical or not optimistic about the future of the world don't really have an open mind to try to think about the world that way, particularly those who are secular or who. So I'm wondering, how do you present the concept of divine providence to a secular audience? Wonderful people, well-intentioned, hoping for history to make progress, but they don't think this way. I wonder if you could very quickly tell us if there's a way to present this that's palatable in today's culture.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, one hook I've used is the founders and their sense of providence. The last sentence of the Declaration of Independence recognizes providence, and they're guided by divine providence. And of course, there was some deist influence among them, especially through Thomas Paine. But I think America, as you said, I think America has had a sense of providence kind of ingrained in some level.
Yes.
So it's a question of appealing to that. America stood up and suffered a lot to get rid of slavery. They went to war to save Europe twice. So there's something in the American DNA that I believe is a product of a sense of divine providence. I think we simply have to refer to that because, and also intellectually, my point that providence precedes and transcends all divisions is inarguable theoretically. Yes, one may not have a sense of providence, but it doesn't mean it's not there. So if you believe in God, if you believe in the divine, I think it's a very short step to believe in divine providence.
Do you see any of those ingredients in Gaza that you pointed to that are important, were necessary for peace to develop there? The emergence of able type organization to confront, to present a different view of Gaza than Hamas does. Is there any of that underway? Have you noticed?
Well, I'd like to point out that we sort of take the state of war in the Palestine-Israel conflict as a given. But look at so many other countries like Jordan, where I lived a long time. Over 50% of the population is Palestinian, but you hardly have any of these problems of terrorism and disruption. So it's unfortunately the conflict has been fed by the Arab nations who use it for their own purposes. And think about all the money provided to Hamas, for example, by Qatar, billions and billions of dollars,
Yes.
and through UNRWA, billions of dollars by the world community. Is stupid. The point is, there will never be peace if Hamas is running uh, Gaza, or even I think if the PLO is running the West Bank, because these are organizations rooted in conflict. They believe in the destruction of Israel.
You mean Fatah on the West Bank?
Fatah is a more moderate element within the PLO, which runs the Palestinian Authority. I
Yeah.
mentioned some of these acronyms like the Democratic DFLP, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, or the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. These are hardcore Marxist organizations that were embraced in the formation of the PLO in the 1960s. That's why it had so much difficulty making peace, because you have Marxists in the organization who are looking for revolution. They're not looking for peace.
Very good. Well, thank you. Believe it or not, Thomas, we're only 2 minutes behind schedule. So thank you very much. You got through that. I guess you covered most of what you wanted to say, although I know you were speaking at quite a clip.
Yeah, I'm sorry it was galloping, but anyway.
No, we appreciate it. A tremendous amount of preparation there and study and experience. Now I'd like to turn our attention to our friend from Sudan who's actually living in Japan, Abdelmoumin Ahmed, who's here with an academic background in the field of Islamic studies, and he's an author of several books in the area of Islam and world peace. And he will provide a response to what we just heard from Thomas Cromwell.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Thomas, for inviting me for this function. And thank you for the, amazing presentation which you gave, which really gave a good summary about Islam and the situation of Islamic world today in relation to Judaism and Christianity. And I agree with you concerning the problem is really a Cain-Abel relationship between Jewish and Muslims. And it is really connected to Cain-Abel situation. And actually in the Quran said that the problem of Cain and Abel is not only Cain problem, it is Cain and Abel problem. Cain was nervous and full with hatred, but also Abel was arrogant. And if you read the Quranic verses, it was very clear the dialogue between the two brothers can show you in the Quran, can show you that how also Abel was arrogant and has no intention to calm down his brother anger. This is one point. And I agree with you also that we have to look for the invisible hand of God in the providence. God is working somewhere in the providence. It's even in the now relationship between Jewish and Christian and the Muslim and the Arabs. So it's true, we have to find a way how to unite Cain and Abel together. And I think going back to Abraham can really give us a good foundation to bring them together as children of Abraham. So therefore, what we are doing has also a providential meaning and purpose. Anyhow, the title of this forum this function is Divine Providence and the War in Gaza. And this is a very complicated issue, actually. I will start explain about the providence of Islam. As Thomas mentioned, if Judaism accepted Jesus Christ, then they would have absorbed, there would have been no problem between Jewish and Christians and Muslims. They would have absorbed their cousins, the Arabs, in the New Testament movement. Generally, Islam came out for the following reasons. First, Jewish rejection of Jesus Christ. Second, the early death of Jesus and the theological confusion in Christianity. And three, fulfilling God's promise, as Thomas has mentioned, to Abraham for Ishmael descendants, as it is mentioned in the Torah and in the Quran, because Abraham loves both his children, Ishmael and Isaac. Also, I noticed that God no longer trusts one nation for his providence. Therefore, he's bringing out many models for religion, not only in Judaism and Christianity and Islam, but even in Buddhism and Hindu and Confucianism. They are all, in a way or another, playing a role in the providence of God. But generally, Abrahamic religions, they play the central role. And the most central point is the mission of Jesus Christ, of peace, love, and forgiveness. So, originally, Islam came to support Christianity. This is my understanding. And originally, Islam came as a reformation movement within Christianity. But for some reason, this providence changed by the immigration from Mecca to Medina. And now it is, by moving from Mecca to Medina, Islam turns to challenge Christianity, seeking to reform it, of course, or to, anyhow, it is clear that Islam itself is in need for also reformation. But Islam really changed from Medina to a challenging to Christianity and very critical to Judaism. This is from the providential point of view in Islam. And then let's talk about Gaza war. Actually, I want to talk about the possibilities of peace in the Middle East and this Gaza war. How can build a relation between Jews and Arabs and Muslims? The relationship between Muslims and Jews is a religious, political, emotional, and spiritual. Religious, political, emotional, spiritual conflict. There is a historical resentment between Arabs and the Jews, inherited from Sarah and Hagar, as Thomas has mentioned. But it's also very interesting that Muslim and the Arab has nothing to do with the Jewish last diaspora from their land. This was done by the Romans. Titus expelled the Jews from their land and destroyed the second Jerusalem temple 2,000 years ago, after their famous revolt against the Romans. I think that all the people of the Middle East are partially the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yes.
Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not only Ishmael. And this is very important. Otherwise, where is the 10 lost tribes of Israel? They are all there in the Middle East, in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and even maybe the Arabian Peninsula. So I think most of them converted to Christianity and Islam. But they are all cousins and in-laws. Anyhow, some historians consider the Edomite, of course, they are the rulers of Judea at Jesus' time. They consider them like Arab converted to Judaism. And of course, Esau, the twin brother of Jacob and the forefather of the Edomite, his wife was the daughter of Ishmael. And it was said that, this is another story, the famous Barabbas was of an Arab origin. His name is, they said his name is Yushua Bar Abbas. Abbas is a typical Arabic name. His name Bar Abbas. And of course, Barabbas was exchanged with Jesus in the famous dialogue between Pilatus and the leaders of Judaism at that time. Anyhow, before Islam, there was no problem between Jews and Arabs. But later, the Quran gave a negative view about Jews based on their rejection of Jesus Christ and their negative attitude toward Islam in Medina. Though the Quran absolved the Jewish of the blood of Jesus Christ, because the Quran put it clearly that Jesus was not killed by the Jewish. He was just being elevated or ascended to God in heaven. So this can somehow relieve the Jewish people from the blood of Jesus Christ from a Muslim point of view. And actually, in the history of Islam, Jews were not really persecuted. We have a good example of historical Islamic in Spain. Jews were well received, or even by the Ottoman Empire after expulsion from Spain. The problem came out in 1948, when the state came out, the Jewish state. But also, interestingly, the Quran was clear about God giving the Holy Land to the Israelites. The Quran said, يا قوم ادخلوا الأرض المقدسة التي كتب الله لكم. O my people, this is Moses talking in the Quran, O my people, enter the Holy Land which Allah has assigned unto you, to the Jewish people, to the Israelites actually. Also the Quran said, وأورثنا القوم الذين كانوا يستضعفون مشارق الأرض ومغاربها التي باركنا فيها وتمت كلمة ربك الحسنى على بني إسرائيل بما صبروا ودمرنا ما كان يصنع فرعون وقومه ما كانوا يعرشون. Sorry, I have to translate this. And we made the people considered weak and of no account. He's talking about the Israelites. We made them inheritors of the lands in both east and west, lands whereon we sent down our blessing, and the fair promise of the Lord was fulfilled for the children of Israel, because they had patience and constancy. Anyhow, the Umayyad dynasty is really, how to say, generally Muslims, they revere them, but actually now there is a big movement among the Muslims to put the Umayyad in their proper position. The Umayyad, they made many mistakes actually in the history of Islam. Not only, they even highly persecuted the Prophet Muhammad family. They killed them, they persecuted them. Anyhow, the Umayyad dynasty, they built the Mosque of the Dome and the Aqsa Mosque for a pure political reason at that time. This is a long story. I don't want to go into the details.
Mr. Ahmed, we're actually running out of time now, so try to wrap up your comments.
Okay. Anyhow, violent jihad in Islam is an extension of early violent Judaism against the Gentiles. And by Jesus Christ, the Old Testament came to an end. Also by modern Muslim reformers like Baha'u'llah, Qadiani, and Muhammad Taha, the Old Testament of Islam also is coming to its end. Baha'u'llah, one of the most famous modern reformers of Islam, he called for peaceful Islam and abolishing violent jihad.
Okay.
Ustad Mahmoud Taha.
Very good. All right. We're going to have to we're getting into some fairly detailed information now, and I think we want to broaden it back to our original theme, which is understanding the notion of divine providence, the basic idea of providence, and how it can help us understand what's going on today in the world, especially in Gaza.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for that tremendous amount of information on Islam and its history. So we now, well, before we start the conversation, open it up, we have 30 minutes to go. Thomas, would you like to add anything or respond in any way to the comments made by Abdelmoumin?
Just that I found his some of the Quranic references to the Jewish claim to the land interesting. I thought that was quite helpful because there are factions within the Arab world who recognize that and are perfectly fine with the existence of Israel.
Very good. Well, it seems that in all these camps, within them, there is a Cain and Abel aspect to each element in this confrontation. And Thomas or Mr. Ahmed, I wonder, it seems that the stance being taken by the government of Israel is really a sharp contrast. In one sense, they certainly adhere to your view, Thomas, that there's no future of a peaceful country in Gaza with Hamas in the political leadership. But their approach to the situation is so heavy-handed and so it seems it almost has resentment as its motivation. So I wonder if you could just share your thoughts about the military political strategy of the present Likud government in Israel.
Well, I think they have a virtually impossible situation from the history. They see the October 7th attack as the worst event in their history since the Holocaust. This is a pretty big statement. And the horrific nature of the attack just underscores the need to put an end to this status quo. So what are they going to do? I do think that, and I sort of touched on this, I think the secular nature of the predominantly secular nature of Zionism could be somewhat problematic because it sees things through what I think is a secondary lens, of sort of political, strategic lens, rather than a spiritual lens. And I think the spirituality of Judaism and it has to become the center of Israel's approach to solving this problem. But it's not insoluble. It's really not. I mean, there's no reason why the Palestinians have to be controlled by Hamas or, Islamic Jihad or the PLO.
Very good. Well, thank you for that. And I'd now like to ask if we would open our conversation up to encourage the audience to participate. And I would suggest doing this by using the raise hand function. So if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see reactions. And you can click on reactions and then recognize hand gestures. I think that's how you do it. Make it possible so that we could recognize you when you raise your hand. And I see a few hands raised already. Very good. Well, we're very happy to have here one of the faculty members of HJI International Graduate School, and he's Jewish in background. Grew up in a Jewish family. Would like to hear his comments, Professor Wilson.
Oh, thank you. There are 2 points I want to make. First of all, I was involved a lot in the MEPI Providence Middle East Peace Initiative, and we were making great progress in developing good relations with the moderate Palestinians in the West Bank. And I believe that the way forward for Middle East peace needs to go through the West Bank, not through Gaza. But the way things have developed, especially the way Netanyahu government has been operating, they have not been negotiating in good faith with the West Bank people, with Mahmoud Abbas. And Gaza has become a way to tar all Palestinians as being terrorists, and has obscured the clear Cain-Abel division within Palestinians between the Abel-type Palestinians in the West Bank and the Cain-type Palestinians in Gaza. So I still believe the way forward, once all of this horrible situation in Gaza has cooled down, must be through Ramallah. That's my first point. My second point is I believe that with the advent of Holy Mother Han and the understanding that God is our heavenly parent, who is also our heavenly mother, there are new paradigms that are opening up that can help us to go beyond the conundrums and difficulties of Cain and Abel. In Abraham's family, for example, there is now, in the spiritual world anyway, an opening towards what I can call co-parenting. So Hagar can become the co-parent of Isaac, and Sarah can become the co-parent of Ishmael. We have this in a lot of secular families, of course, where you have divorce and remarriage and this and that. And because that traditional society was so patriarchal, it was a big competition and rivalry between Sarah and Hagar and Isaac and Ishmael over primogeniture and who is the first and who gets the inheritance. But with a more feminine point of view, what you might say Heavenly Mother advocated point of view, there can be co-parenting arrangement where all the children and all the mothers can express love for one another and consider their children as each other's children. And I think that is going to be the way forward for resolving the problem in the Abraham's family, that core problem, and take out the sting of that long festering resentment of the Muslim people that Hagar was expelled from Abraham's house.
What does co-parenting mean in the case of Palestinian-Israeli relations?
Well, if, as Mr. Cromwell correctly says, there is a root, a providential root going back to Abraham's family that has sort of animated the problem between Muslims and Jews and between Israelis and Palestinians as descendants of Hagar and as descendants of Sarah. That root has to be resolved first. As long as the root is festering, there is a basis for the resentment to continue. But once that root can be healed, and the people in Abraham's family in the spiritual world can really start to form co-parenting relationships, and Hagar can love Isaac and Sarah can love Ishmael, and they can be sisters, truly sisters to one another, Hagar and Sarah.
Does that mean families in Israel and the Palestinian in the West Bank would form small groups, or?
It means that the hatred between Jews and Muslims can die down, and eventually being a Jew and being a Muslim would be just like being a Presbyterian and being a Catholic. In other words, it will be all that sting, which is rooted in these providential conditions from the past, can gradually die away. That's what I believe.
All right. Thank you for being with us this evening, Dr. Wilson, and for sharing your thoughts, those 2 points. We appreciate it. We're also joined by Alan Jessen. Alan, would you like to share your thoughts or your question?
Sure. Simple point that I observed at the very beginning I found interesting. Thomas, thank you for your presentation. So in the story of Cain and Abel in the Christian Bible, it says here, sin is couching at your door and you must master it. So there's a direction from God of what you need to do. And again, if its resentment is from Lucifer, goes way back to the beginning, all of us deal with it. So the Christian teaching there in that passage is to master it, but it's absent that in the surah that you had up on the screen. And instead of mastering it, it said God accepts the God-fearing. So I don't know, that can be a little problematic. I'm not criticizing, the Quran or the surah, just observing that there's a little different tone there in terms of how you deal with that situation of Cain and Abel. And if you explode that out into our culture, the culture of our religions, how, it's helpful to have that admonition to overcome yourself, for you to overcome the resentments. So I thought that was very interesting. I think something appeared late in a later surah too, but What do you think of that,
I bet
Thomas?
Abdelmoumin would like to have
Yeah,
some.
sure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, this dialogue between Cain and Abel, very interesting in the Quran because Cain said to his brother, I'm going to kill you. Then Abel said to him, why God didn't accept your offering? Because you are not pious. God only accepts the pious people offering. Then he said to him, if you want to kill me, go ahead, kill me. Then you will take the burden of my blood on your blood, something like that. So the Quran really is showing a different, the other side of Abel. Abel was arrogant,
Yeah.
was not humble. He should love his brother. He should guide him and just calm his anger down. Please come to me. I can show you how to present your offering in a better way so that God can accept your offering. This is my understanding to the Quranic dialogue between Cain and Abel.
Yeah.
So you mentioned and you spoke earlier that it's not really a Cain problem, it's a Cain-Abel problem.
Yes, it is. This is my understanding.
It does not find resolution unless there's a change in heart from both sides.
Right.
I would like to point out, though, that in terms of the historical development of Islam, the importance of Sufism again, because the critical thing about Sufism is that it's self-reflective. In other words, the problem with fundamentalism is you always blame someone else for the problems you face, the world face, they face, and your solution is to get rid of them. That's the root of violence. But the sort of self-reflection which Cain was supposed to go through is actually practiced in the Sufi traditions. And this is actually a big topic, the Abel-type movements within the Islamic world. I had no time to discuss it, but there are very significant Abel-type movements in the Islamic world. And just briefly to come back to Andrew's observations, something one should point out, I think, is that Israel's population is 21% Arab, composed of Christians and Muslims. And from my experience, they live very peacefully within Israel.
Okay.
Thomas, you had a lot of data that I didn't get a close look at it, but are there Sufis in both Shia and Sunni Islam?
Yes, I mean, Abdelmoumin may have more to say about that, but they're predominantly associated with Sunni Islam, I think. And that's simply because Sunni's the big guy on the block, 85 or 90%. Yeah.
I may add something. When I was in Jerusalem, some of the Israeli scholars would go weekly to a Sufi meeting, and there was a Sufi sheikh in Jerusalem that they very much respected. And so there's a whole group of faculty members from Technion and some of the other Israeli universities who are learning Sufism.
Oh, interesting.
Very good.
Interesting.
David Stewart has his hand raised. Would love to hear your comment, David.
Yeah, I have a question. Maybe Abdelmoumin knows, but I'm wondering if the Palestinians are really the Cains of the Cains. When Russia went into Chechnya in the mid-90s and then again at the end of the 90s with Putin, and they absolutely destroyed Grozny, nobody gave a shit because the Chechens are basically a criminal nation running the mafia. So people just didn't care in the Soviet world. And I'm wondering if the Palestinians are a bit the same, and that really the rest of the Arab world doesn't care. Wherever the Palestinians have gone, when they've gone to Jordan, when they've gone to Lebanon, they've made a hell of a mess. There's that horrific statistic of, a certain number of Palestinians went to Denmark and over 60% of their lineage have been in prison. And I just wonder if there's any truth to that, and that adds to the difficulty of the problem, because is there really support for them within the Arab world? Nobody seems to want them, right? I'm just wondering if that's an added level of difficulty here.
Well,
Yeah.
Abdelmoumin, we want to hear from you.
Oh yeah, I think especially Hamas ideology is really a conflicting, misunderstanding ideology. They they represent the extremes of conflicting Islam with Judaism, of course, and Christianity. And I think they are, because they are Muslim brothers, so they have no foundation for peace and understanding the other side. That means they misunderstand the course of history. And of course, we can see this in the grave mistake made by Hamas, But anyhow, I think the Israelites also, they have to work for building new relationship, as Dr. Wilson explained, with the able-type Palestinians, like in Ramallah, like in the West Bank. They really have to seek how to build a new future with them. God plan, original plan for the Palestinians and the Jews to live together in one state. But if this is impossible, they have to find another way, how to build a good relation between these two different nations. Thank you.
I'd like to point out that I wouldn't describe them as Cain of Cain sort of thing, but there's really a deep division. I mean, Palestinians within the Arab world are rather distinguished by and large. They like education, and they often take important roles. The politics that comes with them is a problem for all of them. But, for example, in the Arabian Gulf region, where a lot of educated Arabs are needed for those economies, they fit perfectly well. They've had problems, but Palestine is used as a political issue by the Arab leaders as an excuse for cracking down on their own populations, this and that. It's a very cynical game. And Islam itself has become sort of Palestinianized. In other words, to be a good Muslim, you must support the Palestinian agenda, which is just nonsense, absolute nonsense. So in a sense, the Palestinians as a whole are victims of their use by the Arab/Islamic world as a cause célèbre.
Very interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, very interesting.
I just want to mention also that, excuse me, the Arab really generally they committed three major mistakes. They rejected 1948 resolution of the United Nations. They rejected it, at that time. And later, during Abdel Nasser time, they rejected Roger's, proposals. And even Sadat and Bevin treaties was rejected by most Arab people. But actually, they should not reject them. They should find and seek a way. If they really accepted all these treaties and all these resolutions, I think the problem could have been solved a long time ago.
That is so interesting to hear a Muslim say that. I've never heard anybody state that before. And to me, that makes so much sense. I don't know why you don't hear that perspective anywhere else. Yeah. The situation in 1948 was so favorable compared to the situation now.
Right.
Yes. Thomas Sellover.
Yeah. Thank you. Just very briefly, with appreciation for the main speaker and the commentator as well. Just a note on the concept of divine providence, which we're talking about all together.
Yes.
Somehow, this divine providence, if you go back into the kind of, heaven's dream, so to speak, God's dream, it's a very inclusive dream. It's an inclusive providence. And one of the difficulties, I think, for each of the communities, major communities that we're talking about, is being inclusive vis-a-vis the others. Mm-hmm. In Christian theology, roughly speaking, there are ways to talk about, well, why did the Buddhism movement happen? Why did Confucius happen? It's preparation for Jesus. But you can't use that argument to cover Islam. And why? Then what for? how can Islam be understood from a Christian point of view as something providential? That was alluded to by Mr. Ahmed also in terms of a corrective, that kind of thinking, that there's something that Christianity needs to learn from Islam, and from the success of Islam. So and vice versa around the table, that there's something to learn from the others in terms of an understanding of divine providence, which is inclusive of all of them. So, and I think I may say that unificationists also have some things to learn on the issue of inclusiveness too. So that's just a comment to try to think, what do we mean? What would we like to see meant by the concept of divine providence? Thank you.
I mean, that is the key point is, for each of us within our faith to have a providential perspective of our own faith, to see it in the context of the providence. I think that's actually the key. And I think that's the core of a big part of Father's contribution in his teaching. It's a revolutionary explanation of the divine providence. And so unificationists, bear the main responsibility to educate on this point.
Here's a interesting comment from Andrew Higashi Baba from our chat. The Jewish population in Israel now is mainly of European descent, whereas the Jews of Jesus and Muhammad's time were Syrians and Palestinians. How does that shift fit the historical dynamic? Is that something you could comment on, Thomas?
Yeah, well, we would call them Sephardic Jews now. They come from the region, whereas the Ashkenazi Jews were the main immigrants, obviously after World War II in reaction to the Holocaust and under the ideology of Zionism.
Yeah.
But many of them were socialists, like the kibbutzim and these systems of socialist solutions to human problems were quite deeply implanted, I think, in the immigrant communities. And again, that's why Zionism has this secular colorism or domination. But there obviously is a religious element to it too. But I think Zionism in its pure secular form is not peaceful. Ultimately, it's not. I mean, it's not an ideology that can create a peaceful relationship with, in particular, Islam. Probably with Christianity, because of the root they come from in Europe and the long history of cohabitation, despite the ghettoization of many Jewish communities in Europe. It's not like they had a wonderful experience in Europe. That's why they ended up in Israel. So yeah.
It seems that the kibbutzim, or the places, is the culture within Israel that's the most open to integrating with the Palestinians. From my experience, having been to them, they might be secular, but they're not. They don't have that militant side to them.
Yeah, it's true, and so they're not all secular either, but many are secular. It's a socialist ideal, shared property, shared wealth, and so on.
Yeah, I mean they're quite moderate in their outlook towards the Palestinians, right?
Yeah, I mean generally the left in Israel is that's where the peaceniks are, the Peace Now movement and people like that.
Yeah.
But honestly, that's not the solution, in my opinion. It has to come from a spiritual root. That's an ideological or sociological approach, which hasn't worked. Frankly, it hasn't worked.
Okay, here's a comment I saw from George Howe. What is the relationship with Palestinians and Hamas? Why don't Palestinians shut them down or do something? There's a viewpoint. I'm kind of okay. There's a viewpoint that Hamas is representative of the Palestinians. Now, that's a complicated question, right?
Yeah. Abdelmoumin, you want to speak to that?
I don't think, I don't think Hamas is representing the Palestinians. This is very obvious and clear because
Representing is the word, representing.
they
People,
are not, Hamas is not representing the Palestinians because generally PLO is official representing of the Palestinians. But because Hamas it took like it took the responsibility from their own point of view. They took like the position of combating the Israelis, and it became like a war between political Judaism and political Islam. Political Judaism facing political Islam, you know. Therefore, some people are really backing Hamas. But now, many Muslim groups, they discover that Hamas is creating a chaos and creating a problem, even for the Palestinians, you know.
yeah.
And you can see what is going on in Jordan these days, you know.
Oh, yeah.
In Jordan, something is going there in Jordan.
Well, there is a anti-Hamas organization developing in Gaza,
Yeah.
but it's hard to know
I see.
how seriously to take them or whether they have any future or any momentum. They do
Yeah,
get,
because Hamas is a terror organization, and it's like being in a communist state. It's that bad.
yeah.
That's why Israel has to, sorry to say, but Israel has to eliminate their power. There'll never, ever be a solution if they don't.
Here's a provocative comment from David Stewart, and I think this one might go to Thomas. The Palestinians are on the wrong side of every issue. The Mufti of Jerusalem supporting Hitler, in 1948 choosing war over recognizing Israel, in 1967 war again and a humiliating defeat, in the 1940s till today choosing violence over 7 different offers of statehood, in the 1990s choosing Saddam Hussein's IRA and the Red Army faction terrorists over democratic Europe in the Cold War. They chose USSR, Iraq over Kuwait, today Iran over other Israel's Arab states, China over Taiwan, and Russia over Ukraine. So David is saying that they seem to systematically always choose.
Yeah, this is Cain. Their leaders are Cain-like, and they impose Cain-like ideology. It's very hard to say what the people on the street actually believe, what they actually want. As you pointed out, Jim, there is a movement trying to get started because their lives have been destroyed by Hamas, and it's clear.
Yes.
But yeah, it's absolutely true. The Palestinian leadership has been stunningly bad throughout the whole modern history. The PLO and Yasser Arafat were a very limited organization. He was a big compromiser. He missed opportunities. And, the organization was riddled with Marxists. So they're not going to be helpful. They're going to be on the wrong side of history as well. So this alliance between Hamas and communism is a striking demonstration of the sort of the universality of Cain and the problem it brings of resentment guiding policy. That's all there is to it. I mean, I knew many good Palestinians. I lived in Jordan for many years, so many of my friends and neighbors were Palestinians who had separated themselves from that reality. But it's also true that throughout the Arab world, there's a lot of gut resentment towards Israel because it's been inculcated through education, literally over decades. And this is really pernicious, and this has to change. It's really poison.
That's certainly the case inside Gaza.
Absolutely. It's radical there. And the UNRWA schools had that in their textbooks, incredibly. They completely failed their mission.
But it is true, and we need to wrap up. It's about 9 o'clock. Dr. Wilson pointed out that during the big effort made with the Middle East Peace Initiative, there was plenty of receptiveness among Palestinians for the initiative that was taken, and they were easier to have dialogue with than a lot of the leaders in Jerusalem. Is that a fair statement, Dr. Wilson?
Yes, it was. And if what one criticism of the Middle East Peace Initiative is we didn't work hard enough to cement our base with the Israeli side, because the Palestinians were so thirsty for and open. You know, when True Mother came to Jerusalem in 1992, it was the Haredim, the radical Israelis, kicked her out of the hotel. And it was a Palestinian hotel in East Jerusalem where she finally ended up speaking.
Oh, wow.
And that's
We were
just
both there,
indicative of the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were both in Israel at that time, Andy.
Yes, I recall.
Yeah.
That's an interesting
Interesting.
anecdote, isn't it? Fascinating anecdote. What is the spiritual principle behind that outcome? That Cain is, or in this case, the Palestinians really want to receive the blessing and the providence and God's love, just like anybody else.
I think it's just like the receptivity of Africa to our True Mother today is much easier than Korea.
Yeah.
Christians, because when you step out of the line of fire of the direct Cain-Abel conflict, you can find a lot of people of goodwill, and they're not under so much spiritual pressure to deal with this kind of providential, historical resentment sort of thing. That's why with True Mother now reaching out beyond just the providential nations and making heavenly Africa and heavenly this and heavenly that, there's a broadening of the way the providence is working now. It's not so bound to the past as it used to be.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. There's a little anecdote here from David Payer. The people of Gaza did elect Hamas with a 75% vote in the elections. Of course, it was one man, one vote, one time. Yes, but that was very early. That was right after the Palestinians were given back Gaza. I think there was only one election in 2006, and there was never another one. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's the Muslim Brotherhood, its sort of slogan, which is used across the Islamic world, especially the Arab world, is Islam ho il hal. Islam is the solution. And it's a very simple slogan, but they've got a long way with that, with especially uneducated people or poorer people. In other words, you're suffering in Gaza, you're suffering in the West Bank. Islam is the solution. So they gave Hamas a chance foolishly. And I think now they've had to pay the price.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, it's been such an interesting conversation. And I really thank everyone for being here. We had over 40 participants and two excellent commentators, which was really helpful to us to learn a lot about divine providence and try to put the situation going on in Israel and Gaza right now in that perspective. So it's very valuable and helpful. I would think this is our second meeting on the situation in Gaza, and I expect we will have another one at some point. It's such an important issue from the viewpoint of divine providence. Thank you, everyone, very much for being here. I appreciate your participation.
Thank you.